a partner in some of a grant that we work on, and I absolutely adore her. I know you guys will too. She's very, very smart and really, really amazing in describing all of this information. So I'm going to turn it over to Amanda.
Perfect. Thank you, Anita. And thank you everyone for joining on today. I'm super excited to talk about this topic. So as Anita said, I work at Extension. I'm at the Maricopa County Cooperative Extension Office in Phoenix. I'm a program coordinator for the Center for Urban Smart Agriculture, and we teach a beginning beekeeping class. So I'll dive right in. This is going to be a very quick, condensed version of that. We'll try to cover a lot of topics. So we'll get started. So when we talk about beekeeping, although there are over 20,000 species of bees worldwide, when we talk about beekeeping for honey production, we're talking about a particular species, which is Apis mellifera. Mellifera standing for honey-bearing bee. And you'll often hear apiculture, and that is another synonymous word for beekeeping, and essentially it's the culture of Apis. And this is a domesticated and managed bee. It's not native to the US. It's actually native to Europe, parts of Asia, and Africa. And when we're talking about, any form of livestock, there are also different breeds within that species. So I really like this diagram on the right there. You can see a bunch of different bee species. Some popular ones are Italian, Russian, Carniolan, and Buckfast. And with these different breeds, there are also different attributes or traits that come with them. Some are better honey producers. Some are more defensive and have better pest resistance. Some have better foraging habits or better brood rearing habits. So that's just something to keep in mind. And different climate adaptabilities as well. Some bees prefer warmer climates and some are more adapted to colder climates. And just a brief history of beekeeping. Humans have had a really long history with honeybees dating back thousands of years. Essentially, we were another predator for the honeybee. And you can see in these cave paintings and depictions here some early human interactions with honeybees, smoking them. And these are generally in the early history of our interactions with bees. These were just wild colonies that we encountered and would smoke them and harvest their honey and pretty much destroy the colony. Then we eventually evolved into actually keeping honeybees by providing managed cavities. And some of the earliest evidence of these cavities date back to ancient Egypt. And you can see in these depictions here, people are harvesting honeycombs and packaging them. There's a hieroglyph of a bee. So around time is when we actually started managing or keeping bees. And here are some other types of managed hives that developed in different cultures. You have these horizontal clay pipe hives there, a Greek hive. You may have seen these straw skeps before. Also these faux tree log hives or bee trees, they're often called. And overall, these hive structures were really inefficient, and harvesting the honey, the methods used, generally resulted in killing the bees or just destroying the comb. So along the 1800s, along came this gentleman, Lorenzo Langstroth, who really revolutionized beekeeping. He had really astute observations, and this led to the publication of The Hive and the Honeybee, as you can see here on the right. And he's recognized as the father of modern beekeeping. And what really revolutionized beekeeping from his observations were this introduction of this concept of the bee space. And with that, the development of the modern beehive, which would be top opening and you'd have these movable frames. So here you can see that bee space. So if you're going to keep bees, this is a really important concept to keep in mind. So bees in spaces larger than 3/8 of an inch will build comb, and anything smaller than 1/4 of an inch, they'll fill that with propolis. And propolis is essentially a sticky resin that the bees collect from plants and trees, and they use it to seal any cracks, waterproof the inside of the hive. It's almost like a bee glue. And so on average, this space is about 5/16 of an inch. So in a modern Langstroth hive, there would be about a 5/16 or 3/8 inch space separating each frame and all the hive body components from all the other hive parts. And you can kind of see a better depiction of that. So this would be commercially, this is what's used predominantly is the Langstroth hive. So you have these different boxes that stack upon each other, and inside you can see frames. So this really changed the game of beekeeping because now you could manage your hive, inspect it without destroying the hive. So we can maintain perennial colonies this way. Diving into a little bit about the honeybee biology. So the honeybee is a true social insect, meaning it has different caste or family members. So we're all familiar with the queen bee. There's one per colony, and she is the fertile female of the colony. Then we have the thousands of daughters, which we know is the workers, and these are infertile females. And then depending on the seasons, a number of drones or male bees. And so these different cast members, as you can see on that picture on the right, they differ in their size, their shape, genetics, and biology. Also, they differ in the tasks they perform in the colony. And honeybees go through a complete metamorphic cycle. So from egg, larva, pupa, and then emerge as an adult honeybee. And we refer to these immature stages as the brood. So oftentimes, if you recall that picture of the Langstroth hive, the bottom hive there is what's often referred to as the brood box. And so that's where a majority of these immature stages are going to be. And talking more about the colony, so really when we think about honeybees, we can kind of consider them as one organism or the superorganism, with each of these honeybee characters kind of functioning as individual cells. And so these cells can't really exist away from each other for a long time. So any honeybee cannot survive outside of the colony. They depend on each other for survival and for perpetuating their cycles of brood. And they reproduce in a function called swarming. So usually in springtime, maybe early summer, if the hive is getting too crowded, they will create a new queen. The colony will split and swarm, as you can see on that branch right there. Talking more about the colony, so when we talk about the nest, that's also synonymous with what we call the hive. This is the physical dwelling of the bee. So in nature, this would be a dark enclosed cavity, maybe the hollow of a tree or a dark cave. And this provides protection from predators, the weather, and it also allows them to better regulate temperature and humidity. And the wax comb, this is built by young worker bees. It's attached to the top of the cavity where they build their house, and they maintain that bee space, that 1/4 of an inch to 3/8 of an inch. The hexagonal cells are slightly angled upward, so that allows for nothing to fall out. Let's see, when we talk about the brood, they generally will orientate their brood in the center of the colony and then store food on the outside. So you can see in that picture there, the brood in the middle, you can kind of see those white flecks. So that's uncapped larvae. And then outside of that is pollen. And then outside of that is capped honey. And they also have different cell sizes for their different workers, drones, and specialized queen cells. So you can see in this photo here kind of the specialized cell sizes. So a queen cell, really neat if you ever get to see one of these in person. They kind of look like a little peanut. The worker cells, that's what you'll see the majority of the cells being. And then drone cells are slightly larger because drone bees are larger. And so they kind of look like a concave little pencil tip, eraser tip. And so bees also follow the cycle of the seasons. Their population dynamics kind of fluctuate with temperatures. So as you can see in that photo, I think this graph is from Southern California. So you can kind of see in the wintertime, during the spring, they kind of come out, their population booms near summer. And then in the fall, turning into winter, slowly dials back down. So in hot weather, they will use water and air circulation to cool down the hive. And in cold weather, you can see in that top right photo, they do something called clustering. So they'll get really close together, consume honey, and generate a lot of heat to keep that brood or, the perpetuation of their offspring warm to survive winter cycles. Delving into a little bit more about each of the cast members. So the queen, as I said before, there's one queen per colony. She is the mated fertile female. She lays eggs that develop into the workers, drones, and potentially future queens. She maintains colony cohesion, so she secretes a variety of pheromones, most notably one known as the queen substance. And these pheromones, they're not airborne, but they're spread by worker contact when they're feeding her, tending to her, they interact with her and they get that pheromone on their body. And then they slowly dissipate that throughout the colony as they're walking over each other, feeding each other through a process called trophallaxis. And the queen's mandibular gland pheromones, they act to influence several functions in the hive. As you can see in that photo, she can signal swarming or supersedure cells. She can attract drones during mating, stimulate workers to forage, and she can suppress worker ovary development. So although workers aren't fertile, they haven't been fertilized, they can still potentially lay eggs, and that's something you don't want. If that ever happens in your colony, that's bad. That's basically a failing colony. And the queen, her only function is to lay eggs, so she really has no part in actually caring for the brood. That's all relying upon the workers. Excuse me. Now, talking about the drone. So, depending on the season, there will be a number of drones in the colony. And these really perform no specialized tasks within the hive. And you can kind of see that bottom right photo there, comparing a female worker bee to that of a drone bee. So, they have much larger eyes because they perform these mating flights. They have that larger thorax, so they can have stronger flight muscles. And they have really underdeveloped mouth parts, so they can't really do anything in the hive, and they depend on other people to feed them. And their only purpose is to mate with a queen. So when they're mature, about a week or more in age, they'll leave their hive and search for a queen, and they'll form these mating drone swarms. And if they're successful in mating with the queen, that's it, donezo for them. Mating rips out their internal organs, so they had a good life. And then if they're unsuccessful, they return to the hive, and in the fall, they eventually get kicked out because they essentially have no purpose in the hive. So the worker bees stop feeding them, they kick them out the hive, and they eventually die. Moving on to the worker. So generally the worker is broken up into two life periods, being the house bee and the field bee. So as a house bee, they'll do functions such as feeding the larva, building new wax combs, capping brood and honey, processing nectar and pollen for storage, feeding the queens and drones if there are any, and removing dead bodies and debris from the hive. They also function in ventilating and defending the colony. And then they'll transition into, when they're older, a period of what's known as the field bees. So these older house bees take on colony defense, temperature regulation. So essentially, because they are physiologically no longer able to produce wax or produce brood food, they just evolve into defending the colony and then eventually foraging. And here you can see a little more up close how specialized the honeybee is. So in that top photo, it's just covered in pollen as they go from flower to flower, and then they'll eventually clean themselves up. They have something called a pollen press, which is where they'll press it into balls. And then you can see on that bottom right photo, they have something called or corbicula or pollen basket. So this is how they carry pollen through flight. And then that middle photo there, you can see a worker bee secreting wax. So it first comes out as a liquid, and then when it hits air, it hardens into these wax flakes, and that's what they use to build the comb. And so why keep bees for your operation if you're a farmer or gardener? Well, according to the USDA, honeybees pollinate $15 billion worth of crops in the US each year, including more than 130 types of fruits, nuts, and vegetables. And of course, honeybees produce honey, which is worth about 3.2 million in 2017. And honeybees are highly efficient pollinators. Their presence on your farm can lead to increased yields, better quality harvest, and keeping honeybees can diversify your revenue streams. So you can see some of these photos there. Incomplete pollination or zero pollination can result in misshapen fruit or aborted fruit. So it's really important to ensure you have a diverse population of pollinators, and a great way to do that is to keep honeybees. And talking about the different revenue products or services you can potentially generate from a hive. So of course there's honey. You can sell wax as well. You can either use that in cosmetics. You can also sell to other beekeepers. There's a market for pollen as a nutrient supplement. There's also therapeutical uses for venom. You've probably heard of royal jelly. There's a pretty big market for that in the cosmetic industry and as a nutrient supplement. You can also market that propolis or that sticky bee glue. That is also a medicinal supplement. And if you get really good, you can actually populate or keep repopulating your bees and actually sell them to other beekeepers or beginning beekeepers. You can also get into queen rearing. That's a huge market. Swarm removal. And of course, as you develop your skill base, eventually you can teach classes. And one of the most popular revenue making streams for beekeeping are pollination services. And beyond that, with all these products, you can turn them into a number of value-added products from candles, soaps, baked goods, and even infused honeys. So what are the bare basics you really need to begin keeping honeybees? Well, you're going to need a hive body, of course, and I'll focus on the Langstroth, but there are other hive bodies you can experiment with. And a Langstroth body will come with a reversible entrance reducer, frames. You may want a queen excluder. I'll show you images of that. You'll want an all-purpose hive tool. You'll need a bee smoker with fuel and a lighter. And of course, you'll need a bee suit. And with that, a pair of bee resistant or sting resistant gloves. Honey extracting equipment, you can get a variety of equipment for that. And of course, you're going to need to purchase bees. So here you can see a little more in-depth explanation of the Langstroth hive. So this is predominantly the commercial hive that's used, and most beekeeping equipment is going to be manufactured for this. So as we said before, it was developed in the mid 1800s, and the main benefit of this is you can easily remove those frames, lift the boxes for easy inspection without killing or upsetting the bees too much. You can buy these pre-assembled or unassembled. They come in 5, 8, or 10 frame sizes. You can also see they come in shallow, medium, or deep boxes. So you can see in that photo, the bottom box is a deep box, and then on top are shallows. Usually they call those honey supers because that's where the bees store a majority of their honey. And you can have them painted or unpainted. If you paint them, they'll generally last longer, so that's recommended. And when it comes to the frames, these can be either wooden or plastic. And when it comes to the foundation on those frames, you can use wax, you can do foundationless, and they also have plastic frames as well. So you can kind of see a closer look at frames here. So on the top left there, that's just the basic wooden frame. And so you can run your frames foundationless. If you do that, you'll need to run a little bevel on the top so the bees have something to draw down. But more common is using something that has foundation already because it's really expensive for the bees to produce wax. It takes about 8 pounds of honey to make 1 pound of wax. So if you can give them foundation, it just gives them a good starting point, and the faster they'll start producing honey for you. You can see in the bottom right, that's typically how wax foundation will come. You'll order it in sheets like that, and you can attach it to the blank frames. Here at the extension office for our hives, we use these plastic frames. You can see those are the ones with the black face right there. And so that's essentially just a plastic sheet with that hexagonal pattern and a thin coat of wax brushed onto it. Another note about the wax foundation, if you are going to use purely wax, it's recommended to run a wire support in your frames. And that just prohibits any blowout when you're extracting your honey because this comb is very fragile. So it's good to give it a little bit of support. And here you can see some more examples of Langstroth hive setups. So you'll want to make sure you have a hive stand too. I don't think I mentioned that, but that's good to elevate your hives off the ground. Uh, it keeps pests away, predators, keeps them dry. You don't want your boxes getting wet. That'll lead to rot. And you can see here it's really easy to either use cinder blocks and some 2x4s. They also sell commercial metal stands. And you can get creative with it as well if you're going to paint your box. You know, if you're into artistic expressions, that's a very nice route to go. And so beyond that, you're going to want to make sure you get a well-ventilated bee suit and gloves. At the bare minimum, you really want to get a veil. Some beekeepers who are really experienced, they just wear a veil. And then they go gloveless because they're really comfortable with working with their bees. And if you don't want to wear these clunky sting-proof gloves, you can wear nitrile gloves as well. They're not sting-proof, but they will keep, propolis and honey off your hands. So those are a nice way to go as well. You also want to get a hive tool. So you can see two styles pictured here. On top, that's more of a J-hook hive tool style. I really like that one because you can really get under the frame, the top bar of the frames with that one and lift them up. And then the bottom there is a more common style hive tool. It's more of a crowbar style. That one's nice too. And you really want to make sure you have one of these because you can see in that photo with the beekeeper using his hive tool, these are really useful for breaking apart the frames because over time the bees are going to caulk them together with that sticky propolis substance. So you need something to pry them apart and help you lift the frames up for your inspections. You also want to make sure you have a smoker and some sort of smoker fuel. They sell commercial bee wood pellets, but you can use any sort of wood pellet, burlap, dried leaves, anything that's flammable, and made of natural materials you can use. And so why do we want to smoke the bees? Well, this triggers a survival response in them. They think, there's a forest fire somewhere, so they're going to have to evacuate soon. So what they do, it's really neat. If you see this after you smoke your bees, they'll just hurriedly start gorging themselves on honey. And so what that does is it just fills their honey stomach up. And so it doesn't prevent them from stinging, but it kind of suppresses their ability to sting, and it also distracts them so you can work in the hive without them being too defensive. Now, when it comes to purchasing your bees, you generally have two routes to go. You can get a nucleus colony or what's referred to a nuke. And so this is usually 3 to 5 frames with a queen, workers, and brood. So essentially like a mini colony. So these are really great. They have a fast buildup because they already have food stores. They have honey, pollen, all stages of the brood, and they come with a fertile queen. And you can see generally your queen on the bottom photo there, she'll come marked with a color, so she's easy to identify and spot. And every color coordinates to a specific year. So this year, 2025, the color is blue for queens. So beyond nuke packages, you can also get a package of bees. And these are essentially, you can see in the top photo there, it's literally just a box of bees. So there'll be loose worker bees. You'll have a queen. She'll usually be in a queen cage pictured in the bottom there. So she's just protected from getting damaged. And then it usually comes with a can of syrup on top. You can see in that photo, just so they can survive either shipping or storage. And so it's often recommended that people, when you're first getting into beekeeping, to get a package of bees because a nucleus colony that'll explode very quickly, more than people are understanding how fastly they build up. So it's good to get a package of bees because there's a little bit slower buildup. You can kind of examine what's going on in your colony more, but really it's up to you and what's available to you. You also want to make sure you have a adequate water supply available to your bees at all time. This can be a fountain. People use these pet waterers with rocks. Even if you have a farm, at our farm they love to drink off of the irrigation, the drip tape. But it's important, whatever source of water you do provide, you want to put some sort of landing pad or rocks or marbles so the bees have something to land on. Because if they get wet, they're not very good swimmers, and so they'll eventually drown if they don't have some proper footing for them. But really important to make sure you have some water source around your bees. They use this for their development and also for temperature regulation, which is really important in the summer in Arizona. So you may actually have to offer substitute for your bees. This can be in the form of a commercial syrup solution you can buy as pictured here, or you can make your own sugar water syrup. If you do that, you just want to make sure you use pure cane sugar, because if you use brown sugar, molasses, anything like that, it has just indigestible components in it that is not very good for the bees. So if you're going the route of making your own sugar syrup, just use pure cane sugar. And so when should you offer substitute? During the winter months, they're not doing a lot of foraging if it's too cold. There may not be a lot of floral resources, so it's a good time to provide them some sugar syrup or supplement. When they don't have enough incoming nectar or pollen, this is referred to periods of dearth. So if you don't have a lot of things blooming, it might be a good option to feed them some syrup because you don't want them to starve. And during times of persistent drought, forage is also impacted. So if we're not getting any rain, we're not having any wildflower blooms or any floral blooms. So that's going to affect their food source as well. And of course, any visual observations you may have. So when you go to do your hive inspection, when you look at those frames, if they're not collecting a lot of nectar, if they're not collecting a lot of pollen, the boxes are light, that's a good sign that you may need to feed them or supplement. Also, if you notice a low number of foragers, that's another sign you may need to feed them. A low brood production. So if you are doing your hive inspection and you see those brood and they don't look too healthy, they're not developing right, that may be a sign that you need to feed them. And of course, when you're installing package bees or even a nuke, feeding them helps stimulate wax production and starts helping to get them going. So here you can see some different methods of how to feed your bees. So a popular method of what I use at Extension here is this in-frame feeder. So it's essentially just a frame you can pop in one of your boxes there, and that's really nice. And then you can fill it up with about a gallon of sugar syrup. So that's a great option. Another option are these mason jar feeders that you can put inside the hive as well. They sell these mason jar feeders where you can put them on the outside, and they're called Boardman feeders. You can use those as well, but I don't prefer to use those because they can stimulate robbing either from other honeybees, wasps, ants. Really anything can get to them if it's outside the colony. And also, if you're in Arizona, that's potentially could just start baking in the sun and ferment faster. So I prefer to do in-hive feeders. And then on the top there, you can either make your own or buy pollen patty substitutes. So will be a protein substitute for your bees. And you just lay them on top of the top bars like that. When it comes to honey extraction, there are a few methods you can go. If you're producing a smaller amount of honey, you can do something called crush and strain. So essentially, this is where you'll harvest the entire comb or scrape the entire comb off of your frames, mash it in a bucket with a potato masher or something like that. You can see on that bottom photo, you just blend it up really well, and then you'll strain it. So you can either buy buckets or make your own buckets with cheesecloth, and eventually just let that honey strain and settle down. And then you'll want to wait about 24 hours after straining so that honey can have a chance to settle and the air bubbles will move to the top. And then after that, you can dry your honey. Another method of extraction, a little bit pricier, but if you have either a collective of people that have hives, you can join together and purchase one, or you have enough hives of your own, you can buy a honey extractor. And these can either be manual, in that photo in the middle there, you can see it's a manual crank, They also come in motorized versions, which those are really nice. We just recently used our motorized one at Extension for our beekeeping class, and it was no work at all. We just sat back, turned the knob, and the honey was extracted. And you can see in this photo, so these extractors use centrifugal force. So you can see in that image with the frames there, you just load up your frames, either hand crank or switch the knob, and then after a certain amount of time, you'll flip your frames, so you extract all the honey. And I forgot to mention before you do that, you'll want to make sure you uncap your honey. So in the photos on the left there, you can either use an uncapping knife. They sell electric uncapping knives, which are really nice. Or if you're using one that doesn't have a battery source, you can just dip your knife in hot water, and that helps easily slide through the wax there. Also, you can use something called an uncapping tool. So that's that bottom photo there. It's kind of like a metal comb. So you can use that to scrape the wax cappings off. And you really want to do that because if you don't scrape the wax cappings off, you're not going to be able to extract your honey. And then same as with the crush and strain method. After you extract it, you'll want to strain your honey and let it settle. And I should note, uh, along with being, more efficient and less labor using an extractor, it's really nice because this way you can reuse your frames. So as I mentioned before, it takes about 8 pounds of honey to make a pound of wax. So doing it this way, you preserve that hexagonal structure and you can reuse your frames and put them back in the hives. Versus the crush and strain method, you're just destroying the wax completely. You can save that wax and then reuse it to make your own wax foundation, but using the extractor is just faster because after you're done extracting the honey, you can just proceed to just pop those frames back in the hive. You can kind of see here, here's a estimated beginning beekeeper startup budget. So generally, you can get a 10 frame kit assembled for $400. Sometimes it's recommended for beginning beekeepers to get at least 2 hives. So this is just because if you have something wrong happen with one hive, maybe the queen isn't laying, they abscond or leave, then you have another hive to rely on. Also, if one hive maybe isn't as strong or doing as well and the other hive is stronger, you can kind of swap resources. You can give honey to the other hive from your stronger colony. You can also give brood to your weaker colony from your stronger colony. And then you can either, as we mentioned, purchase a package of bees or a nucleus colony. Any nutrition or feed supplements you may need, miscellaneous school tools. You'll make sure you want a hive tool. You can also get something called a bee brush. That's useful as well. And there's a whole slew of other bee tools from frame holders, frame grips, all these things, observation hives. Didn't have time to talk about it in this presentation, but you'll also need mite treatments. So a big pest of honeybees is something called a varroa mite. So these are probably the number one pest afflicting honeybees, and they've essentially spread across the whole globe. So if you're keeping honeybees, you're also keeping varroa mite. And so you can buy treatments that are either vapor treatments, they sell, it's like thymol menthol tabs you can put in the hive and other various chemical treatments depending on if you want to be, more organic or use synthetic pesticides, miticides. And also, of course, bee suit and gloves. And I didn't put it here, but some sort of honey extraction equipment as well. And anything else you think you may need. So here's just gives you a better idea of if you were to get into beekeeping, how much startup cost or capital you'd need. And a note on purchasing used beekeeping equipment. It's fine to purchase, some tools, maybe some bee suits, and potentially hives if you know the beekeeper, but it's generally looked down upon to buy used beekeeping equipment because you don't want to spread diseases and things like that. Really nasty disease is American foul brood. And if you happen to purchase equipment that has that on it, you're not going to be successful in beekeeping at all because your colonies are just going to immediately die pretty much. So it's best practices to buy all this stuff new unless you have a really good relationship and know the history of the beekeeper you're buying used equipment from. With that, I finished up a little bit early, but here is my contact information. Feel free to email me anytime. If you happen to be in the Phoenix area, please visit us at the Maricopa County Cooperative Extension. Here is a link to our Center for Urban Smart Agriculture website. And if you'd like to sign up for a newsletter, that's the best way to stay up to date on all our events. This Friday, if you happen to be in the Phoenix area, we're having a pollinator event and we put on field days every couple of months. We do urban ag webinars. So if you're interested in learning more about what we do here, feel free to sign up for our newsletter or check out the website. And with that, I can take any questions.
Thanks,
Yes,
Amanda.
I've got a question.
Sorry, go ahead.
How do you prevent ants from coming around when you got, honey and it's sweet? And how do you prevent ants?
Yeah, no, great question. That can definitely be a huge pest as well. So let me see, I'll go back. So the main thing you can do when it comes to ants, it's nice if you have one of these metal stands because you can essentially put on the bottom things called ant moats. So you can either buy these commercially or you can make your own with an old soup can and some water and oil. So that way they can't climb up the legs of your hive stand there. You can also use diatomaceous earth, sprinkle that around your hive. But it's really tricky dealing with ants because, anything that really any pesticide you use, you don't want to really use that because that can also affect the bees. So the best way is to use these leg stands and use something called an ant moat, either buying one or making your own.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Where in Arizona can we buy bees?
Yeah. So if you go to Arizona Beekeeper Association, they have a resource page with local beekeepers that sell bees. You can also, when it comes to packaged bees, you can buy them online. So a lot of commercial bee suppliers from Man Lake is a popular one. They sell packaged bees. But as far as local, yeah, I would go to Arizona Beekeeper Association, and they have a resource page with local beekeepers that sell nucleus and packaged bees.
Hey, Amanda, while you guys are answering questions, I'm going to pop up an after presentation poll. So if you guys can fill that out, I would really appreciate it.
I'm
Hey,
seeing
man.
some. Oh yeah,
Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
how about heat and or humidity? What kind of conditions? What are the thresholds? Or even cold? Is there temperature or humidity challenges?
Yeah, so I mean when it comes to Arizona, not too much humidity since it's so dry here. They do a really good job of regulating that in the hive. But definitely heat. Anything above like 90 degrees internal temperatures for their hive, that's, when they start to kind of get into a slum and slow down. So here at Extension, we provide them some shade. You can put your hives under trees that provide shade. I've had people ask about misters. I'm not too keen on that idea just because, if you're keeping that humidity higher, that affects their temperature regulation and also it might expedite the rotting of your hives. So usually just shade, make sure they have a reliable water source. Those are the most important things. When it comes to winter, if you do live in a cold climate where you get snow, generally anything under 40 degrees, the bees will start to kind of slow down. And so in that one photo I showed with the brood cluster, that's what they'll naturally do. So they'll cluster together and generate heat. But if you get snow, really cold temperatures, what you can do is actually insulate your hive. So you can wrap them or protect them with some insulation, and that helps carry them over as well. But generally, they're pretty good at managing their temperatures. It's just in those extremes, you'll want to give them a little bit of help.
What about pollen sources? What kind of good native plants do you find them liking to go to? And is there a certain amount that you think you need to be next to have a successful hive?
Yeah, good question. I mean, here in Arizona, we have like a lot of native trees that have different flowering periods. Those are great. They love Palo Verde, mesquite. Really, any native plant has a pretty good floral resource. Here at Extension, we have a few flower spaces. We have borage. They really enjoy that. But anything that's good for, general pollinators is usually good for bees as well. And isn't in terms of uh, how much resources you need to keep bees. I mean, they can travel up to 5 miles, but they generally stay within a mile or three of their hive. So really, if you're in an urban area, if you have any green spaces, if you garden yourself, they're pretty resourceful at finding those. If you're in any agricultural areas, generally it's not an issue. If you have people growing a lot of cotton, citrus trees, things like that, so they'll find plenty of forage. But it is something to keep in mind if you are in a super urbanized area, maybe you don't have a lot of green spaces or access to any floral resources, then it might not be the best place to keep bees.
So I have another question.
Yeah.
So sometimes you could go to farmers markets or things like that, and you'll find where maybe they have like two different types of honey, where one says orange blossom, the other one says mesquite. Or how do they actually know that that's what the bees got pollen from? I mean, I mean, I can understand if you're generally near like an orange grove, but I mean, obviously you're going to have a little bit of a mixture of a bunch of different pollens. Was that correct? Or
Yeah. So definitely, generally in that circumstance, it's people who do pollination services. So, if they're taking it to an orchard area where they know like these are all citrus trees and, a 1 mile, 3 mile radius. But beyond that, if you really want to make sure they actually offer pollen tests. And so that's the best way to know if you have like a true monofloral honey is to actually get it tested. And from there, they can see what kinds of pollen, the percentage. And so that's the best route if you're like really into ensuring you have that. But generally, it's like people know if they're dropping their hives off in a citrus orchard and that's the only thing within 3 miles that it's going to be a monofloral source of honey.
okay, yeah, makes sense.
So
There's
that's
a
something.
question.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. There's a question from Barry really quick. I missed. Can you use mite
Mhm.
treatment on bee hotels?
I'm not sure. I mean, when it comes to native bees, I don't think the varroa mite affects them too much, so I don't think there would be a need to, but I'm not sure if there are any native mites that affect native bees as well. But this is just purely in terms of honeybee pests.
This is Victoria again. I have a question. I live on a Navajo reservation, and I do have bees in a top bar. This is what I use.
Hmm.
But I was concerned about the ordinance. I know I'm on a Navajo reservation, but are there ordinances for keeping bees in your backyard in Arizona?
Yeah, there are. So I can't speak to every city, but every city will have different rules. So if you just go to your city's website, they're generally considered a livestock, so they'll be under that section. And some cities, I know for Queen Creek, for instance, you actually have to get a beekeeping license from the county clerk. Other cities have restrictions on how many hives you can keep, and the distance you can keep them from property lines and things along that. So it just depends, yeah, on what city, but they'd have that information on their websites.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Amanda, can I jump in
So
on
on
that
that
real
same,
quick?
What was that? Sorry.
Can I jump in on that question really quick?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, Victoria, we did have hives in Holbrook at the extension office. We had a hive in the backyard and we were actually forced to take it down, and it's not because of any ordinances. One was because the park right next door, people were allergic and we couldn't guarantee the bees would not sting somebody if they were out playing. The other reason was sorry, the people that were walking by were throwing mud at it and trying to get rid of the bees. So while we didn't have a an actual ordinance in Holbrook or anything that would have stopped it, the decision was made that we couldn't be good bee neighbors without causing harm to people. So that was just something that we had to look at. The Navajo County doesn't necessarily have an ordinance, and Navajo Nation may have one through chapters or through other areas, but we were really focusing on being good bee neighbors, and we made the decision that the hive was not a good area.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. And that does happen. There are certain things you can do. It's definitely a challenge keeping bees with neighbors and especially people that aren't familiar with beekeeping. But you can, if you're in an urban area, it's a good idea to keep your hives kind of secluded, out of sight from your neighbors. You can also install something called a bee fence, so just any barrier that kind of directs the bees' flight path up and over that, so they're avoiding any, traffic footpaths people may frequent a lot. And of course, if you're inspecting your bees, make sure you're not doing it when your neighbors are having a cookout or barbecue. But it is unfortunate that does happen. There are still stigmas around bees, and of course the allergy issue. So just, do your best. Familiarize yourself with your neighbors, maybe offer them a jar of honey, truce, and see what you can do from there.
So on that note, what is a good recommended safe distance? So I live in a very rural area in
Hmm.
northeastern Arizona. So neighbors are relatively far away, but how far should I put it away from my house?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to that, if you're in a rural situation, or more secluded, I wouldn't worry too much about your neighbors. But as far as the distance from your house, I mean, as long as you're managing your hives properly, you're not letting them become Africanized, there's really no safety issue to you unless you do a lot of activity in your yard. Maybe you do a lot of mowing or construction, then you'd probably want to place them a little bit further so they're not close to that disturbance. But I mean, in my mind, I'd keep them as close as I can just for ease and convenience, and so be motivated to actually check on them versus if they're, several hundred feet away, you may not be motivated to actually do your hive inspections and make sure they're okay. So it's really just up to you and depending on your activities. Yeah.
And then how do you prevent the Africanized bees from happening? Since I have seen a lot of the African bee swarms in our area. So what would they potentially take over the hive that I would provide for the bees I have?
Yeah, no, so basically the best way to prevent that is just make sure your colony is queen right. So you want to make sure you have a queen that you know the genetics of. So if you purchase the package or nucleus, it'll come with that marked queen, so you know the genetics. And the way they become Africanized is if that queen dies or something happens to her, and then they raise a new queen. And if that happens, that new queen is going to have wild genetics. And so over time, if you don't manage your queen, that colony is going to turn Africanized. So the best way is to just make sure you have a queen you know the genetics for, and that'll determine the biology and genetics of the rest of the brood cycle. So it's all dependent on the queen.
Okay.
All right, guys, 7 more minutes until we wrap up. And I actually have a question for you, Amanda. So I have been delving into growing. Um, I'm trying to remember I can't remember the other name, but it's an early blooming species. And honeyberry, sorry. I'm delving into growing honeyberries. And it flowers really early in the year. So a lot of the bees are not quite as active or don't find it. Is there a variety of bee that would be better for maybe earlier than later? Or is that not something where a bee would be, a variety would be better over another? It's just the fact that they're not quite woken up.
Yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, I'm not super familiar with like colder climate varieties, but I think I do know Russian breeds are more cold tolerant, but as far as when they kind of break that dormancy stage, I'm not entirely sure what breeds are better for that. But that's a good question. I'd be interested to know that as well. That's a good point.
Stay tuned. I will let you know.
Yeah.
I lost an entire crop this year of honeyberries because I couldn't find pollinators.
Oh
It's too
no.
early and they don't love hand pollination, so
Gotcha.
I will let you know.
A couple of years ago, I did a project trying to help the mines on a Navajo reservation, and we received a bunch of Buckfast bees for me to install at residents near the mine, and they did really well. And so that's one bees that I can recommend for this area, and they did real well through winter as well too. So we did install some up at Monument Valley, and we trained the residents there how to care for their bees. But unfortunately, with the drought, the heat, it's some of them just migrated elsewhere where they needed more food and more pollen. So
Thank you for that recommendation. I will check that out. Michelle did ask if mason bees survive here, and I'm not familiar with mason bees.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with a lot of other species of bees as well, but I do know we have the mason bees or carpenter bees, at least in the Phoenix area. I'm assuming they'd be up north as well, but again, I'm not familiar with all the species of those.
and I have
There you,
another question.
oh,
I'm
go
Oh
sorry.
ahead.
yeah.
Do you have a kit or solution on testing your honey and to see what's in your honey? Because, we have neighbors that change oil and have antifreeze laying around, and,
Mm.
you just want to make sure that your honey is safe. So, do you have a kit for testing?
I do not have a kit, but I know I'm trying to remember there is a lab through the USDA that you can send samples of your hive to, but I think that's more for American uh, foul brood. But let me see if I can figure out what that is. Yeah, so I'll post it in the chat here. It's the Agricultural Research Service. They have a bee research laboratory. So they might have resources for that. I'll drop it in the chat. And again, I know they do testing for American foul brood, but they might do different testing for pesticides, things like that as well.
And there are some independent ones. So you can look at the National Honey Board, and they're looking more for adulteration of honey. And if there's any corn syrup added, to, thin it out or whatever. But there is another group called and I'm trying to figure it out. It's called the Tenemus Group, and they do honey, and they have a list of a honey analysis in the accredited laboratories, which do test for contamination, variety, origin, and quality. And so what you're looking for is more of the contamination side. So that might be an option too, and I'll pop that in chat. All right.